Hi, everybody. I'm gonna hang out for a few minutes and let some folks join. Hi, all. Just gonna link this to a few places. Hello. Thanks so much to LSU Press for hosting this remote author series. It's kind of a cool thing since we're all stuck at home and it's pretty hard to promote books from home. But hopefully this will be pretty close to the real thing. All right, let's see. Hi, Laura. Nice to see you. All right. I think I'm going to wait one more minute and then we'll go for it. Okay, we're going to do this thing. I'm Katie Bickham, and I'm so happy to be an LSU author. It was my dream press when I was starting out. And I'm mostly going to be reading from my newest book, which is called Mouths Open to Name Her. The book focuses quite a lot on motherhood and stories of motherhood kind of throughout history from different perspectives. And I am going to share at the end a new poem that has not been published, but we're keeping our fingers crossed on that. Okay, so the first poem I'm going to share is it's called Berry Picking. And this was actually the first poem that I wrote in the collection, so it kind of started all the other poems coming. And my mother is, of course, horrified that I write poems like this, but we're just going to go for it. Berry picking. That summer in the liquid heat, my mother took me berry picking. We heaped them in tin buckets to the brim. She was rattling off her mother's recipe for compote when it happened. She noticed first. What I thought was sweat dripped down, staining the tiny corn silk hairs on my freckled thigh. I jumped at the sight, fingers desperate to find the source. My mother walked away from me and let me understand. I cupped my hands against myself, pitiful and sweating. Mama, what's wrong? But she was a stone in the orchard, face fixed in still resignation and nothing else. My clothes clung to me. I curled, weeping in the dappled shade, berries glinting dumbly in the sun. Why wouldn't she hold me? This woman who sat vigil for each fever, who said once that she'd stayed up late counting the hairs on my head. Her eyes rooted to my sullied legs, she knew what I did not. From that moment on, all the words we said would loosely translate to goodbye. Hi, Elisa. I am going to share this next poem. It's called Shorn, and initially this was like an academic research paper on the history of women's hair and all the different ways that it's represented and sexualized or desexualized. Like you think of all of like the Renaissance paintings where women's hair cover up their breasts and vaginas. And then you think about like nuns who cover their hair as a sign of respect to God. And so there's this like weird way that we can trace women's history through trends or norms involving hair. So it switched at one point from an academic paper to a poem, and it's in numbered sections. Shorn. 1. The Pentecostal woman next door confides, the Lord forbids a blade touch her hair. It rats and scrapes her knees, frayed, unbeautiful. She weeps in the mornings, rakes and breaks comb teeth through it. Her neck is off. She whispers, the nice gay man downtown says he'll take me out back, douse it with perm solution, and clap it off between 2 boards. The Lord, she knows, is merciful. 2. Not even God can bear our nakedness, and in his kindness curtained us with hair. Mine is beautiful. I've seen men's fingers possessed, clicking and itching to reach for it, to catch it in a breeze. It is long, golden, and, as God wills it, when I am unclothed, it covers almost everything that makes me woman. With it, imagine all the Savior's feet I could anoint with precious oil, on my knees, repentant, reborn. Or, put in my place, towered, chaste, think of all the princes who could grip it like rope in their sweating fists, scale my prison, unlock me, liberate me from witches. 3. In crowded squares, inquisitors shaved witches bare to seek out the devil's mark. When they found none, they tried to coax it out, poured boiling lard into the women's eyes, navels, vaginas. The devil marks us all. 4. Unshorn, we are death itself, serpentine and secret. Our hair conceals our power to bear souls into the world, to feed them from our own flesh, sower, tender, reaper, shepherd, wolf, wool and fur. For our crimes in Eden, temples, beds and caves and back seats, we have been covered by the gods in hair, snaked by goddesses, marked by devils, beheaded by heroes and weaponized. And still their fingers twitch. They must know what it feels like in their hands. Perhaps if we let it loose, pin it up, braid it in 1 braid, 2 braids, cornrow it, perhaps if we perm it, straighten it, relax it, iron it, perhaps if we pick it into an afro, perhaps if we shave it, wig it, veil it, perhaps if we cover it in a habit so that from the sky we are indiscernible from each other, they will be satisfied. Perhaps if we pluck it, wax it into triangles and thin lines, send electrical signals into the follicles. Perhaps if we trade it for food, for money, for train fare, Christmas presents. Perhaps if we let you snip a lock to worship. Perhaps if we let you wrap it around our necks like nooses, you will be satisfied. 6. The Russian army found 14,000 pounds of human hair when they took Auschwitz. Baled and loose, still curled, ribboned, the hair yet unused for socks, for mattresses upon which men would dream of women, for thread, for rope. That's one of my many, my husband calls them my angry girl poems. And the book overall, when I started putting it together, I realized that it was, pretty dark, and that's hard to avoid when you're looking at issues relating to women's history. But I did want there to be some moments in the book where women sort of got a win or had at least like a quiet moment of triumph. And so one of the things that was really interesting when I was doing research, I was looking at World War II and kind of women's role in that. And so when you had so many of like marriageable, aged young men off at war, there was like a surge in new lesbianism in the US. Doctors were trying to come up with cures left and right. And especially when the men would come home from war and find their wives suddenly not really interested anymore. And so I thought it would be interesting to kind of imagine one of those scenarios where women found each other in that safe place where men suddenly weren't present. So this is called Missoula, Montana, 1950. Dot sighed and pushed her cart, burdened with Lutz flakes on sale and the Ritz crackers her husband liked crumbled on his casseroles. Her son giggled in the cart, trying to disappear beneath the boxes. A routine fog dulled her thoughts, his laughter sweet but muted, as if an aisle away. She shook loose, straightened her dress, pushed the boy and his boxes past the cake flour and frozen TV dinners to the back wall stacked with little jars of baby food. While her husband, Jim, spoon-fed the boy on Saturday mornings as Popeye played, he loved booming, "Look at the boy, meat on his bones." She found herself working to muster a smile at the thought when another cart stopped short on the same row. "Dot," said June Polchak, color spotting her pale cheek. Dot loved the faded blue dress June wore, remembered ironing it once early in the morning, holding it against her face. She braced, shifted her weight. Her hands flitted around her own clothes as if confirming their presence. "Hello, June," she replied, dropping the Gerber jars into the basket and reaching out a gloved hand to shake. June reached over her pregnant belly and took it. They touched like strangers, acquaintances from church, Dot thought, scanning for other shoppers' eyes. But Dot had known those hands, known each knuckle. Frozen there, fingers fixed in June's, Dot did not resist the memory of another time when both their palms were calloused from mill work they'd assumed while their husbands were at war. Their hands were like babies now, uncertain, underused. "How far along?" she asked, when what she ought to say was, "Come away, the babes and all." She swallowed this whole. June smiled, smelled it in the air. "Just another month." She slid Dot's hand on her belly without asking, drawing her whole body forward. Their gazes met, unwavering. Dot's son fidgeted in the cart, restless. Her tears tickled the creases of her cheeks as she stood flanked by bright cereal boxes, pulverized, jarred food, fluorescent lights, body trapped in starched clothes, touching the woman she had touched so often once, the woman she had whispered to, woken nightly, the radio mumbling its bad news in the next room. I wanted to finish my readings from the book with, again, kind of an uplifting poem. So we think quite a lot about like the moment that we become pregnant. Most people can, pinpoint, if not the moment of conception, then definitely the moment where we realize that we're pregnant. And we also have these rituals for the moment we become a mother. We remember that. And then we have this postpartum period that is sort of undefinable. And so I was kind of thinking as I was going through the postpartum phase of my own motherhood, I wondered if there could be a moment where we could say that's when postpartum ended. That's when it stopped and I came out of that. And it's kind of hard for women to say exactly when that is, but my challenge for myself was to pinpoint the moment that the postpartum period was over for me. And this is it. And this kind of finishes the book out and rounds out the experience of motherhood for me. It's called "At Last She Is Finished with Emptiness." After slow months of healing, night nursing, the breast pump, burying the old faithful dog, board meetings, cursing the monitor, the hurrying 3-minute showers and half-hour naps and instant breakfasts, finally, Her husband, who can wait no longer, leads her up the worn stairs to the sanctuary of rumpled bedding. He guides her mouth onto him, tilts her backwards, reopens her softly, a storm door creaking in the sunlight after a long darkness. She hears the crack of a bat. A crowd cheers at the ballpark down the street. She imagines the sweating fans cheer for her, that the jays and robins herald her coming, that she is being urged, egged on by the whole waking universe. Yes, at last she is saying yes again, summering, ready again to belong to the boy and to the man. Afterwards, she tells him a year's worth of secrets. Then they hear the blankets rustle, a babble over the monitor. Sirens sing their songs from both sides, to hold them there, to make them rise. Promise such silence and noise and thirst and wetness, more than enough. Okay, so I'm going to read one last poem, and this is a new poem that's currently unpublished, but I think that my next collection is going to be kind of focusing around this issue, which is eating disorder and women's bodies. So after I read this poem, by the way, we're going to open up the comments for any kind of questions that you might have. So you can go ahead and post those if you know you have a question you'd like to ask, because I'm going to get to that directly after this poem. This poem is called The Most Necessary Thing, and it actually started, that was not the original title. The original title was 13 Ways of Looking at an Anorexic, which is, as some of the poets watching might know, kind of a nod to Wallace Stevens' 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. Nightingale. Blackbird? Oh my God, I'm having a moment. So the poem was originally written in these like numbered section vignettes where each section is not necessarily related to the other. They're all very separate. And so ultimately I moved past that title and past that idea, but you still might notice in the stanzas that they are really kind of distinct from each other. So this ended up being called The Most Necessary Thing. Psychologists believe anorexics are trying to return to the bodies of their girlhoods. I tell the woman helping me choose clothes that I am a 4, as if it were my name. Last year I was a 10, then a 6, myself shrinking like a countdown. And well I know there is a 0 on the rack. There is a way, I know, to disappear. 0 comes from the Arabic sifir, which means empty. Anorexic is from the Greek anorexis, without desire. Some religious men call this perfection. At 10, my breasts grew. A boy in class pretended to admire my necklace, but held them, daring me to speak. There are 1,000 ways to harm a girl like this, and I know them all. I know the weight of fingernails and hair, tonsils, spleen, things I could remove. I know the bone, the brittle inside of a woman, the girl who wishes never to need anything, to live on air. I know the circumferences of each limb in centimeters, inches, finger lengths. A woman says she envies my control. I want to say, you are already lost. I want to say, envy is just another word for hunger. The hips I had were gripped and forced and used, and even then he said he could never love a girl as big as me. Now there is no place his love could fit, no thing to fill his hands. I could slide him away like a plate across stone. There are no ways to harm a girl like this. You're dying, the doctor says. No, I am compressing, condensing into only the most necessary thing. A woman I know can carve cities into peach pits. The most dangerous words a girl can say are, I want. We will never be safe in these skins. Thank you. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions or comments. And feel free to kind of ask anything. I'm pretty much an open book. And while I'm waiting for those, I guess I can kind of talk about some of my new work. So right now, I would imagine it's sort of difficult for any writer at home right now who has children. So this is like a 24-hour kid situation. So it's been sort of difficult to sneak away and write, and also to snap back and forth from writer mode to mom mode really quickly. My son is 5 now. So most of the poems that I'm writing right now are sort of like done in secret in these like little 2-minute windows. And there's maybe a time down in the future where I can sort of binge. Oh, thank you. It's 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. I don't know where I got nightingale from. I was having a brain fart moment. So there's a question. Can you talk a little more about your poem, Shorn? How did you choose these different images of women and their hair? Was there anything interesting you learned about women and their hair that didn't end up in the poem? Okay, so as I said, the poem Shorn began as like a research paper, and I was initially looking at like hair as it's represented in literature. So I had references to Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock, Little Women, where Jo cuts her hair to buy train tickets, The Gift of the Magi, where the woman cuts her hair as to pay for a Christmas gift. And so like there's a lot of stuff about hair being sort of sacrificial, and then we also get hair as like kind of like a tempting thing. So there's all the notions about, like, I really did want there to be a section all about red hair and what that's all about and what it typically represents in art and literature. And then there's like, I have Medusa, who is beheaded, and the big sort of creepy thing about her is her hair. But overall, I think the hair becomes a symbol of women's sexuality, right? Which is so often policed. And it's one of those things that is often admired by men until it's weaponized, even to this like point of having it gripped or pulled. So it's sort of dangerous. And then like we have all of these kind of wonderful things about like women using hair as protests. So you think about like the afro in the 1970s, and the kind of taking back of like the armpit hair and all of these strange things. So for women, I think a lot of our history is wrapped up in the way that we wear or cover our hair. Another question, do you think those 2-minute windows are good for your creative process? I mean, I wish I could say, yes, I'm making the best of the quarantine situation, but honestly, it's really difficult. Most of my writing in the past has been like I typically kind of save stuff up in my mind, and then when I have like a good 2 weeks, I sort of binge write. And so a lot of times for me, like if I look back at my collections, my books, or big projects I've done, they're all done kind of like in not one sitting, but like one window of time that's pretty significant, like a summer. So I'm not used to just trying to like slip things in, because for me there's like a big transition into getting into like the mode, and then sustaining the mode, and then coming out of it again, like re-entering the human world. And so that's really difficult to do in like, you know, a tiny little window of time. But I'm making it work. We're all making it work. So we'll see. For now, it's sort of like saving them up and then getting those 5-minute escapes to make things happen. Yeah, Sarah, I don't have any children. It's difficult to be deeply creative right now. I'm trying, but it can be tough. I mean, really, it's um, so many writers are, mine their lives for content. And so when we're not interacting and we're not going anywhere and we're not observing, it's like, where's my material? There's only so much navel gazing, I think, that a poet can do. So it is difficult to sort of mine our lives when our lives are becoming so internal and um, isolated. And there's also only so many poems that we can write about COVID and isolation. I've written one, but I sort of felt like I said everything I needed to say in that one poem, and I don't want to harp on it anymore. So it is a tricky time for creatives. Okay, so another question: are there any other poems you've written that started out as a project? Is that a normal part of your process? Yes, it is. That is the normal way that I come at poems. I usually start by researching in more of an academic way the things that I'm wanting to write about. So for my motherhood collection that I read from today, I was doing research initially on um, the history of C-sections. So I wanted to know, like, when did we start doing that, and when did it become, I guess, like a standard safe thing to do, and all of these things. And interestingly, the first successful C-section in Africa was done by this woman who was dressed in drag her whole life. Her name was James Berry, and she was dressed as like a British officer, doctor, and she did like what's known to be the first successful C-section in Africa. Anyway, so as I was doing research on C-sections, I came across this little tiny footnote that mentioned auto cesareans, and I'm going to click that. I got to click that. What is that? And then I went down into this rabbit hole about people who have given themselves C-sections, and there are about 20. I think there were like 22 cases ever in the history of the world where it's been successful. And so I then looked up the 22 cases and found one in particular of a real woman who lived in Mexico who delivered her own baby via C-section. And so that became a poem in the book, which is called Oaxaca, Mexico. But yeah, research is definitely kind of the basis of where most of my work comes from. I don't write a whole lot of personal stuff and personal narrative. Most of my poems are documentary or outward facing in style. Laura asks, "Will your unpublished poem is very powerful? Will that be in a collection in the near future?" That's a great question, LSU Press. Um, I'm not there yet, but I do. I really like the idea of collections that are centered around like a single theme or a single idea. Some people frown on that. But my first collection, the Belmar, was this collection of poems where every poem takes place in a different room of a house in a different year. It's like a southern plantation home. And then for Mouths Open to Name Her, all of the poems relate in some way to nursing, menstruating, pregnancy, childbirth, lying in, that kind of thing. And so I will say, like, the poems that I'm writing now are mostly centered on women's bodies, and the way that the intersection that I have with that is with eating disorder and the kind of policing of women's bodies. But I think there are also some celebratory moments in that will be in that collection for sure going forward. So I would say if I had to guess what my next official project will be, it's going to be related to anorexia and women's bodies. I do have like this weird collection of poems that are all about space. I went into a period of space poems, and I'm always interested in formal poetry. So a lot of the individual poems that I've had published in the last 4 years have been villanelles. So at some point in the future, I'm sure I'm going to pitch an all villanelle book to somebody. Question: who are some other poets or writers that you look up to or wish to evoke? Um, Interesting. So let me think about this. I really love Patricia Smith, who is also a poet that who jumps back and forth between structure and closed form and free verse. She's got one of those amazing golden shovel poems where you read the poem, but you can also read all the words down the left margin and then back up the right margin that make like a miniature poem inside. Um, and she's such a great storyteller. Her book Blood Dazzler was all of these sort of narrative poems about Hurricane Katrina. And again, like that's the kind of stuff that I really admire. Not that I don't like confessional poetry, and I write a little bit of it, but as I often tell people when I get this question, like my life has, for all intents and purposes, been pretty pleasant, and I don't know that I've faced a lot of like deep traumas, and so as I said, like there's kind of a limit to how many poems I can write about myself. And so I find it a lot more rewarding to get away from the I and to do that outward storytelling. And I think Patricia is so great at that. Um, and she also has a kind of a style when she's not doing narrative. She has this really kind of interesting style where she writes those poems in like little sections. So she has a poem, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to call the name of it right now, but it's about the female orgasm, and every section is like really separate from each other. And I definitely think I was channeling that when I wrote Shorn. So it's like a whole bunch of different ways of looking at hair, and she's really great at that. I'll post a link to the poem when I get a second to Google it, by Patricia. Okay, if there are no more questions, I think we'll wrap it up. I really appreciate you all joining me. You can grab either one or both of my books from the LSU Press link that's posted in the comments, and they also have a 40% off situation going on right now for all of their books to kind of keep people busy during quarantine. So I highly recommend taking advantage of that. But it's been a real pleasure getting to share and dress up like a grown up for a minute. So I really appreciate you all tuning in, and I hope you've heard something that you connected with. Cheers, all. Stay safe.